The knock on my front door wasn't polite. It rattled the frame, sharp and insistent, like someone trying to break it down. I froze mid-sip of my evening coffee, the bitter steam curling into my nose. Outside, the crickets had fallen silent, as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. At 60, my instincts were slower than they used to be, but my gut had been sharpened by decades in uniform. Something about that knock screamed wrong. When I opened the door, two men in black uniforms stood on my porch. Their badges caught the glow of the porch light, cheap metal that flashed too brightly. The taller one barked, "Chief Harrison, you're under arrest." I stared at them. Under arrest? Me? The shorter one tried to shove a paper into my chest, a crumpled warrant that smelled like printer ink and arrogance. No seal, no judge's signature, just a jumble of legal jargon. They carried themselves stiffly, like actors who had memorized the choreography, but not the weight of it. "You boys want to tell me what this is about?" I asked, voice steady but low. My heart thudded once, hard like a hammer against steel. The taller man's lip curled. "Violation of HOA code. You failed to comply. Now you're going in." The air shifted colder. The night seemed to lean closer. My neighborhood, my quiet cul-de-sac, had seen its share of petty HOA complaints. Lawn too long, mailbox paint chipped, trash cans visible on the wrong day. But this? Sending men dressed like police? That wasn't an infraction. That was war. My hand lingered on the edge of the doorframe. They didn't know who they were dealing with. Beneath the soft flannel shirt and the gray at my temples, I was still chief of police. 35 years sworn, and I could smell a fake badge the way a wolf smells blood. Behind the men, I noticed a black SUV idling at the curb. Headlights dimmed, engine rumbling. And there, in the passenger seat, sat a figure I knew all too well. Leaning back, smirking, arms crossed as if he were a king on his throne. Ethan Cole, 30 years old, newly elected HOA president. My stomach tightened. He had that look, clean suit, slick hair, eyes that burned with the hunger of someone who'd tasted power for the first time and wanted more. Too young to be this arrogant, too green to understand limits. And yet here he was, orchestrating a fake arrest on my doorstep. The porch light flickered. The taller man reached for cuffs, the metallic click snapping through the night air. My neighbor's blinds shifted, silhouettes watching, afraid, curious. In that breathless moment, I saw everything I stood to lose. My home, my dignity, the last fortress of peace I had carved for my family after decades of service. And I asked myself, what happens when the one sworn to protect law and order becomes the target of those who twist power into a weapon? I should back up because if you don't understand the life I built here, you won't understand why I couldn't let it go without a fight. My name's Robert Harrison, 60 years old, retired from active duty, but still serving as chief of police in our quiet county. 35 years in uniform has a way of etching order into your bones. You learn to see the cracks in people's stories, the tremor in their voices, the way power hides behind polite smiles. My home isn't just a house. It's the reward for a lifetime of hard work. A little brick ranch on Willow Bend Lane, with a porch that creaks when you step on it, and a maple tree out front that turns gold every fall. Inside, every inch tells a story. The photos of my wife, gone too soon from cancer, the shadow box of medals my son brought back from his service overseas, the faint pencil marks on the wall where my grandkids measured their height each summer. This wasn't just property, it was memory, it was dignity. It was proof that after a life of service, I had carved out a corner of peace. And that's exactly what Ethan Cole wanted to snatch away. Willow Bend was a cul-de-sac wrapped tight in manicured hedges and iron rules. The HOA was supposed to protect property values, keep things neat, and make life pleasant. But lately it had become a theater of absurdity. Mailbox flag chipped, fine, $50. Garage door left open after 8 p.m., fine, $75. Grass length exceeds 2.5 inches. Violation warning. Most neighbors just sighed, wrote checks, and kept their heads down. Me? I tried to play by the book, even when the rules were petty. You can't serve in law enforcement your whole life and then decide the rules don't matter. But Ethan wasn't content with the order. He was addicted to control. Ethan Cole, 30 years old, new money in an old neighborhood. He had moved in with his gleaming Tesla, his designer suits, and his nose perpetually tilted upward as if the rest of us were ants crawling in his sandbox. He wasn't elected president of the HOA because people liked him. He was elected because no one else wanted the job. He was the only one willing to show up at meetings, and he used that apathy like a crowbar, prying into everyone's lives, writing new rules, threatening lawsuits. The first time he crossed me was small, but telling. I had parked my patrol car, marked official, in my own driveway. That night, I found a letter tucked into my mailbox. Per HOA Regulation 4.3, no commercial or government vehicles may be parked in residential driveways overnight. Future violations will result in fines and legal action. I laughed at the time. A patrol car in my driveway was suddenly against neighborhood standards. I ignored the letter, but Ethan didn't. The next day, he cornered me at the community mailbox, his cologne sharp and suffocating in the humid air. "You think the rules don't apply to you, Chief?" he sneered. I looked him straight in the eye. "That patrol car is the reason your neighborhood is one of the safest in the county. Be grateful it's here." He smirked, lips curling just enough to reveal the threat beneath. "We'll see about that." At first it was laughable. He issued fines I refused to pay. He sent letters that went straight into my shredder. But the escalation was steady, like a pot warming on a stove. He wasn't just after compliance, he wanted submission. Neighbors whispered to me privately, "Robert, just pay him off. It's easier. Don't make waves, he's vindictive." He threatened to sue us over a flower pot, for God's sake. But I couldn't cave. If I did, I'd be admitting that this little tyrant, half my age, had the right to strip me of my dignity. And if I folded, what example would that set for my children, my grandchildren, the officers I commanded? This wasn't about fines or lawn height anymore. This was about principle. There were signs, small, creeping things, that told me Ethan wouldn't stop at warnings. One morning I found a violation notice duct taped to my front door in the rain. Another time I caught him taking pictures of my backyard over the fence, muttering about unapproved structures because of my tool shed. But the most chilling moment came at the last HOA meeting I attended. The air was stale, with the scent of burnt coffee and too much aftershave. Neighbors sat in folding chairs, heads bowed, voices hushed. Ethan stood at the podium like a preacher, reading out fines and rules with the cadence of law, even though his laws were nothing but ink on paper. When I raised my hand to challenge him, his eyes locked on mine, sharp, gleaming, predatory, and he said loudly, so the whole room heard, "Some people here think they're above the law, but I'll remind everyone, nobody is untouchable." The room went dead silent. Eyes darted away from me. Not one person spoke up. I realized then, this wasn't just pettiness. This was personal. He wanted to break me. And when the fake cops showed up on my porch weeks later, I knew he was willing to cross lines that no one else would dare touch. This was the world I lived in, a home that meant everything to me, a community too afraid to resist, and a 30-year-old tyrant who thought he could bend the chief of police to his will. But what Ethan didn't understand, what he couldn't possibly understand, was that I had faced down men far more dangerous than him. And while he saw this as a game of intimidation, I saw it as a battle for the very soul of the neighborhood. The storm was building, and I wasn't about to let him win. The night those fake cops knocked on my door didn't end with handcuffs. I refused to step outside, refused to let them cross the threshold. My voice carried the weight of command I'd honed for decades. Impersonating law enforcement is a felony. Take one more step and you'll regret it. They froze. I saw doubt flicker in their eyes. And within seconds, they retreated to the SUV. The engine growled, the tires squealed, and they vanished down Willow Bend Lane. But the message was clear. Ethan had declared open war. And from that night forward, he escalated his campaign, step by step, rule by rule, as though testing how far he could push before I snapped. The first wave was paper. Each morning, I'd open my mailbox to find a new envelope stamped with HOA letterhead. My fence wasn't neutral earth tone. My front porch light was non-standard wattage. My mailbox apparently leaned 2 degrees to the left. Some of the letters were absurd to the point of comedy. Violation 7.8, decorative wind chime audible beyond 25 feet. Violation 10.2, unauthorized American flag display, not pre-approved. Violation 12.1, lawn ornaments depicting animals, ceramic cardinal. I tore most of them in half, but Ethan wasn't aiming for compliance. He was aiming for harassment. He wanted the grind, the daily reminder that he was watching. When I ignored the letters, the fine started. $50 for the mailbox, $75 for the flag, $125 for the so-called ornament. He sent certified mail this time, as if dressing his threats in legal clothing would make them real. I didn't pay. Instead, I filed every notice in a neat manila folder. Evidence. If Ethan thought he could bury me in paperwork, he underestimated the patience of a man who'd spent decades compiling case files. But the financial pressure worked on others. My neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, whispered to me one morning as she watered her roses, hands trembling, eyes darting to Ethan's house across the street. "Chief, please," she said. "Just let him have his way. I can't afford these fines. I've already paid $400 this month." Her words twisted in my gut. Ethan wasn't just after me. He was bleeding the whole neighborhood. One night around midnight, I heard gravel crunching outside. My curtains parted just enough to catch the glow of a phone screen. A figure, Ethan himself, crouched near my driveway, snapping photos of my patrol car. I stepped onto the porch, my silhouette framed by the light behind me. "Enjoying the view?" I called. He flinched but recovered quickly, standing tall, smug grin plastered across his face. "Documenting violations, Chief. Just doing my job." "Your job ends at the property line," I growled. His grin widened. "Not if the board votes otherwise." The sheer arrogance. He believed his HOA bylaws outweighed state law, county ordinances, and even the Constitution itself. And the worst part? Some of my neighbors believed it too cowed to question. By the third month, Ethan's control was suffocating. He called an emergency HOA meeting in the community clubhouse, the kind of fluorescent lit room that smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. The place was packed. Neighbors filled folding chairs, whispers bouncing like trapped moths. At the front, Ethan stood at a podium, gavel in hand, looking more like a dictator than the president of a suburban association. "Order," he barked, slamming the gavel. "We have serious violations threatening our community values. One homeowner, in particular, has consistently defied our rules. This will not stand." All eyes shifted toward me. I sat in the third row, arms crossed, face unreadable. He pointed directly at me, his voice dripping with venom. "Chief Harrison believes he is above the law. He parks government vehicles illegally. He displays unauthorized symbols. He intimidates board members." The crowd murmured. Some looked away in shame. Others glanced at me with pity. I rose slowly, every movement deliberate. My voice carried, steady as a drumbeat. "Impersonating police officers, trespassing on private property, harassment. These are crimes, Ethan. And I don't care what title you give yourself. You break the law, you answer for it." A hush fell over the room. Ethan smirked, tapping his gavel again. "We'll see whose law matters more." The gavel cracked and the meeting adjourned, but the battle lines were now public. In the weeks that followed, I felt the shift. Neighbors stopped waving when I passed. Conversations hushed as I approached. Fear had seeped into Willow Bend like mold. No one dared oppose Ethan openly, not after seeing how he targeted me. But every so often, a quiet voice slipped through the cracks. Mrs. Alvarez left cookies on my porch with a note. "Thank you for standing up for us." Mr. Turner, an old veteran, whispered as we crossed paths. "Wish I had your guts, Chief." Silent support, but silence all the same. It wasn't enough for Ethan to bury me in letters and fines. One morning, I found my patrol car's tires slashed, 4 neat punctures, rubber bleeding into the asphalt. Another night, my sprinkler system was torn apart, pipes ripped from the ground. I filed police reports. Official, meticulous. But deep down, I knew Ethan was smart enough to cover his tracks. No cameras, no witnesses. just the steady drum of intimidation, and every act chipped away at me. I'd wake at 3 a.m., heart racing, ears straining for footsteps outside. My hands trembled when I opened the mailbox, bracing for another violation. My chest ached with the weight of carrying not just my fight, but my neighbor's fear. For the first time in decades, doubt crept in. What if he wins? What if he takes my home? What if this is the legacy I leave? A man broken by a boy drunk on power. Then came the letter that changed everything, delivered by certified mail stamped urgent. Inside, in cold clinical words, notice of foreclosure proceedings. Due to unpaid HOA fines totaling $7,450, the association has initiated steps to place a lien on your property. Failure to comply will result in foreclosure and sale of said property. My hands shook. Foreclosure? At home. On the place where my wife's laughter still echoed in the walls, where my grandkids' handprints smudged the glass door. I sank into my chair, the paper crumpling in my grip. My blood roared in my ears. Ethan wasn't just bluffing anymore. He was coming for everything. But as I sat there, rage burning through the fear, a realization hardened inside me. Ethan thought he was untouchable because he had twisted neighbors into silence. But he'd made one mistake. He underestimated a man who had spent his life gathering evidence, setting traps, and bringing down men twice as dangerous as him. I opened my file cabinet, pulled out the manila folders, thick with every letter, every fine, every photo I'd taken of Ethan trespassing, every witness statement I'd quietly collected. The rising action was over. It was time to build my case. The foreclosure notice sat on my kitchen table like a loaded gun. Every time I passed, I felt its weight dragging me down, daring me to give up. But I wasn't built that way. Not after 35 years chasing criminals who thought they were untouchable. Ethan Cole thought he was the law. That was his fatal mistake. For 3 weeks, I worked like a detective on his last case. Every evening after patrol, I returned home and spread papers across my dining table. Letters, fines, photos, witness statements. I interviewed Mrs. Alvarez again, this time with my recorder running. She whispered about Ethan's threats, how he told her, "Nice roses, shame if they got dug up." I spoke to Mr. Turner, who confessed Ethan had hinted his VA benefits could get complicated if he didn't comply. I even traced the so-called cops who had shown up at my door. They weren't officers. They were private security, hired under the table from a company Ethan's cousin owned. That was the smoking gun. Impersonation of law enforcement. A felony. Every piece fell into place. But it wasn't enough to have the evidence. I needed to reveal it, publicly, in a way Ethan couldn't spin or bury. And then fate handed me the perfect stage. The quarterly HOA general meeting. The night of the meeting, the clubhouse buzzed with tension. Folding chairs scraped against linoleum, neighbors shifting nervously. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everyone in a pale, sickly glow. At the front stood Ethan, young, polished, smug as ever. His suit was tailored, his tie blood red, his smile practiced. He slammed the gavel, calling the room to order like a man who believed he owned it. "Tonight," he began, voice sharp, "we address the most dangerous threat to our community, those who refuse to obey." His eyes locked on me. "Chief Harrison, you are hereby stripped of all neighborhood privileges. The lien against your property stands. Unless you vacate, foreclosure proceeds." Gasps rippled through the room. Some neighbors looked at me with pity, others with fear. Ethan's smirk widened. He thought it was already over. I rose slowly, my badge gleaming under the harsh light, my file folder thick in my hands. "Mr. Cole," I said evenly, "I think it's time everyone here hears the truth." I stepped to the front, my boots echoing on the tile. Ethan tried to cut me off. "You're out of order," he snapped, slamming the gavel. I raised a hand, my voice carrying with the authority that had commanded courtrooms and crime scenes alike. "Order is my specialty." The room stilled. I laid the first letter on the podium. Violation of an American flag. Illegal since state law protects displays of the national flag. Here's the statute. I slapped down the next. Fine for a patrol car parked in my driveway. Exempt under county ordinance. One by one, I stacked them, each louder than the last. The neighbors leaned forward, eyes widening, murmurs swelled. Then I pulled out my recorder. With a click, Mrs. Alvarez's trembling voice filled the room. He said if I didn't pay, he'd have my roses dug up. He said no one would stop him. Another click. Mr. Turner's gravelly whisper. He told me I could lose my VA benefits if I didn't keep quiet. Said he had friends. Gasps. Whispers. Heads turned toward Ethan. His smile faltered. And then the killing blow. I held up 2 photographs. The fake cops standing on my porch, badges glinting under the porch light. These men are not police. They are private security, paid off the books by Ethan Cole. That, ladies and gentlemen, is felony impersonation of law enforcement. The room erupted. Voices clashed. Chairs scraped. The hum of fear transforming into outrage. Ethan's face flushed crimson. He slammed his gavel again and again, desperate to regain control. Lies, all of it. He's framing me because he hates me. I locked eyes with him, steady, unflinching. The county prosecutor has copies of this file. This meeting is being recorded. Every word, every threat, every illegal act, it's all going to court. Silence crashed down. Ethan froze, caught in the spotlight he'd built for himself. Then, like a dam breaking, the neighbors' voices rose. You threatened me too, shouted a woman from the back. You fined us for our mailbox, another cried. You're a fraud. The tide had turned. His own subjects had risen against him, but no one listened. The board members huddled, pale and trembling, before one finally announced, effective immediately, Ethan Cole is removed as HOA president. Applause erupted, thunderous, cathartic. Ethan tried to shout over it, but his words drowned under the roar of justice. 2 uniformed officers, real officers, entered the clubhouse then, summoned by me hours earlier. Their presence was calm, professional, and undeniable. They stepped forward. Ethan Cole, one said, you're under arrest for impersonation of law enforcement, harassment, and fraud. The click of handcuffs was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. Ethan's face twisted from arrogance to panic. You can't do this. I'm the president. I'm in charge. But as they led him out, the neighbors parted like water, their silence colder than any cell. The meeting ended not with fear, but with relief. Neighbors shook my hand, some with tears in their eyes. Mrs. Alvarez clutched me like I'd saved her life. Mr. Turner saluted, pride shining in his tired eyes. For the first time in months, Willow Bend felt like a community again. And as the night air hit my face outside, I breathed deep, the maple leaves rustling overhead. Justice had been served, but the impact had only just begun. The morning after Ethan's arrest, the neighborhood felt different. I stepped onto my porch with a mug of coffee, the cool air carrying the scent of wet grass. For months, I had braced myself for knocks, letters, threats. But that morning, the silence wasn't tense. It was peaceful. Children's laughter floated down the cul-de-sac, the kind I hadn't heard in weeks. Mrs. Alvarez tended her roses without glancing over her shoulder. Mr. Turner sat on his porch, newspaper in hand, free at last to breathe. Willow Bend Lane was ours again. News spread quickly. Local headlines ran the story. HOA president arrested for impersonating police, harassment. The details came out piece by piece. Ethan had funneled money through the HOA for his private schemes, exaggerated violations to pad fines, and pocketed a good share of them. The foreclosure notices, fraudulent. The lien on my home, illegal. His entire empire of intimidation collapsed overnight. In court, he stood pale and shaken, stripped of the swagger he'd once worn like armor. I sat in the gallery, arms crossed, listening as witness after witness spoke. Not just me, but the neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak. Freed from his grip, they poured out every threat, every whispered intimidation. The judge's gavel fell harder than Ethan's ever had. Convictions, fines, probation, stripped of authority, reputation in ruins. With Ethan gone, the board held a special election. For the first time in years, people actually showed up, ready to vote, ready to take back their community. Mrs. Alvarez, timid as she'd once been, raised her hand to run for secretary. Mr. Turner volunteered for treasurer. And when they asked me to take the presidency, I shook my head. I've spent my life enforcing the law, I said. But this neighborhood doesn't need a chief. It needs neighbors willing to stand together. The applause that followed wasn't for me alone. It was for the idea that no one man, no matter how loud or arrogant, could control them again. I walked the perimeter of my property a few days later, the foreclosure notice shredded and gone, my patrol car shining in the driveway where it belonged. I paused by the maple tree, its leaves just starting to turn. This house had nearly been stolen from me, not with force, but with fear. And yet it stood. My wife's memory still lived in the photographs inside. My grandkids' height marks still lined the hallway wall. Ethan had tried to make me believe my dignity was negotiable, that my home could be reduced to fines and paperwork. But what he never understood was that this place was more than property. It was a legacy. It was love. It was freedom. Neighbors came by more often now. We shared coffee, traded stories, and laughed about the absurdity of Ethan's rules. One evening, Mrs. Alvarez told me, "You reminded us that silence gives power to bullies. You gave us back our voices." Her words sank deep. All my years in law enforcement, I'd fought criminals who hid in shadows, who struck with violence. But Ethan had been different. His weapon wasn't a gun or a knife. It was control. The slow suffocation of dignity through fear. And I realized something. That fight was just as dangerous. Because when good people stay silent, tyranny thrives. Whether it's in a government, a workplace, or a suburban cul-de-sac. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the street bathed in golden light, I sat on my porch and watched neighbors chatting freely, kids riding bikes, laughter echoing. The neighborhood was alive again. I thought about Ethan. Young, hungry, arrogant. He believed power was about control. But power, real power, is about responsibility. It's about protecting, not exploiting. Leading, not dominating. I raised my mug to the sky, the maple leaves rustling overhead. Justice had been served, peace restored, and more than that, a lesson had been carved into the heart of Willow Bend. No bully, no matter how loud or entitled, can stand against a community that refuses to be broken. So if you're listening to this, remember, dignity isn't something you hand over because a man waves a title in your face. Freedom isn't measured in fines or foreclosure notices. And justice isn't just what happens in a courtroom. It's what happens when ordinary people stand up and say enough. For me, it wasn't just about saving a house. It was about proving that even at 60, even after decades of battles, I still had the strength to fight one more time. Not just for myself, but for everyone who had forgotten their own voice. And that, in the end, is the only law that matters.